Welcome to Journalist Roundtable. I'm Larry Casper. Our guests are Luke Rainey from the Slate at Shippensburg University, Gaven Mitchell from the Quad at West Chester University, and Sam Woloson from the Daily Collegian at Penn State University. Welcome, gentlemen. What kinds of stories in general do students want to read about in their college newspaper? Sam, can you start us?
Yeah, sure. I would say that sports ends up being our most popular articles. Obviously, the Penn State football team gets a ton of readership from students, alumni, everybody in the area, as well as our wrestling team, basketball teams, hockey teams. I would say as far as, news coverage goes, I think obviously the election was a big deal for a lot of people, especially with some of the guest speakers that we had come to campus. And then I would say from, more of a lifestyle standpoint, I would say, local music, food reviews, things of that nature also do very well for us.
Gavin and Luke, let me refine the question for you. How do you go about choosing your news, statewide or federal?
If I may, with me, I try to orient my news coverage to be applicable to fellow college students, people who are in school right now, ready to graduate. And since, we're in the larger Philadelphia surrounding county area, there's a lot of different, there's just a lot of people there. And so I think I try to pick things that maybe be more hit home to those sorts of people who are going to school there or live there or anything like that.
So how about you, Luke? How do you make your coverage relevant for your student readership?
Yeah, so speaking from the copy editing position at the Slate, I mean, obviously my chief role is to simply edit articles for grammatical correctness. But one thing that an editorial board is quick and willing to do is if there are controversial issues that occur on a university that have strong public interest demonstrated clearly through whether it's anonymous social media platforms, tips, or just general campus buzz, they're very quick to report on those. And those are often our most popular stories, whether it's something that happens in the campus community or if it's something that happens within the town of Shippensburg itself. And obviously, if there's a story of national interest like we've had with this year's election, that was something that they really, really prioritized with unique one-of-a-kind coverage throughout the semester.
Sam, let's go back to you. What were your paper's goals or your method or your approach to covering the election?
Yeah, I mean, I would say our goal was, at the end of the day, to try and give students the information they would need to, have an informed vote during the election. So, we tried our best to be able to cover issues that really affected both sides. Obviously the presidential election, but also more local elections, state elections, things like that. Just trying to get students the information they would need to make an informed decision.
Gavin, how would you describe the attitude of students going into the election?
I can say, at least for the southeastern area of PA, there are a lot of people and peers, college-age people that were sort of, I guess, just unsatisfied with the sort of coverage going on about the candidates or what maybe some of their policies were. And I think especially as, a lot of these people, this is their first time voting in an election.
Sure.
And PA being one of, key swing states, I think a lot of people felt a lot of pressure about their vote being, I guess, desired in a certain way and not really knowing what to do with that sort of information or pressure from the entire country.
Gavin, try to expand on being dissatisfied. What was dissatisfying, do you suppose, about the candidates themselves? Not the coverage, you also talked about that, but the candidates or their policies?
I think I know a lot from just interviewing fellow students on my campus and in universities like Temple, UPenn, I can think of, where people I've talked to, is just that they were just sort of dissatisfied with the Harris campaign, sort of remaining similar to the previous Biden administration. And a lot of people that I talked to were hoping to see more of a change, which seemed to be the case before the DNC, um, you know, um, and then after the DNC, sort of taking steps back to maintain a sort of similar veneer to the Biden administration. I think that, at least with younger voters and younger people in college, was sort of just disappointing to see.
How about you, Luke? Did it make much difference to students on your campus that Harris was, in fact, a lot younger than Biden, and, of course, a female, too? Did that represent any kind of a turning point in thinking of young people around you?
Yeah, so what I'll say is that obviously once we come back in late August, the switch had happened about a month prior. But I do believe a lot of at least the Democrats that would have been on campus, those supporting the Biden-Harris ticket at the time, once Harris became the nominee, I do think there was a fresh sense of optimism since the Biden campaign, by the time it ended, was really in a bad spot. And during the summer, it had the appearance that Vice President Harris was going to make a serious challenge against Trump. Obviously, that did not really happen given results last week. But there definitely was a new sense of optimism. But nonetheless, I think as people are reacting to the results after the election, I think throughout those past 3 months, the sentiment underneath was also a little bit of concern that there were flaws within the campaign itself. So that was at least the case within the Democrats. Now, as for those on the Republican side, those who've been supporting the Trump ticket, I think there was optimism in its own way. He obviously had a very viral summer, you can call it. A lot of different events that happened, including the debate against President Biden, the assassination attempt with, of course, the famous photograph that went with it, and all things like that. So I think there was optimism on both sides leading into the election.
Sam, what was the prevailing opinion on campus regarding news media coverage of this campaign? And try to put the Daily Collegian aside just for a minute.
Yeah, I would say the perception of media. I think that a lot of people did think that it tended to favor, I think, the Democrats and the Kamala Harris campaign. I think there's a lot of reasons that could be that people would think that way. I would say students, the most outspoken students, tended to be in favor of Harris, or rather against Trump. And so I feel like that was reflected kind of in media coverage across a lot of different outlets, including the Collegian. And obviously, based on that, it was a little bit of a surprise to see the way that Trump won, because based on our kind of like man on the street stories, we would have thought that it would have been a lot the other way in Center County. And yeah, and plus the speakers that came to campus that we covered and that other people covered, a lot of them were, on the Democratic side, on the, against Trump, I think. So I think kind of just maybe in the choice of what got more coverage and what students' voices got more amplified, I think that some students would have felt that it did favor the left.
Now, Luca, a few minutes ago, you heard Gaven say that there was some voters on campus, a lot of them voting for the very first time. There's certainly potential for excitement. And what was the level of excitement, particularly among first-time voters at your university?
Yeah, it was palpable. I mean, it was the first time I had voted in a presidential election, so I shared that excitement with all of them myself. We had hundreds of students, I think, take advantage of transportation services that the university offered to go to a local polling place if they had registered within Shippensburg itself. But I think there was certainly a lot of energy. It was obviously just daily conversation for the month or two leading up to the election. And I do believe students were very excited to be participating in and to make a difference, because this was definitely a campaign that both sides really put a lot of effort into appealing towards young people. And of course, there's no better ground for young people who will be voting than a college campus.
Now, gentlemen, let's get beyond the election itself and consider the day after, the reaction of the student body after the election. Gaven, how would you characterize it in your immediate orbit?
I can say, at least for Westchester University, just probably most people were not happy with the results, but I think the considering Westchester University is in one of the only like 9 counties that were blue in this election, and just in Southeast in general is just a more left leaning area. But I think with Westchester specifically, it's sort of galvanized a lot of people to find community after the fact, even though the results were not what they wanted. I'm seeing a lot of more community building, at least with on my campus in particular.
Sam, how about you? How was the reaction from the student body just after the election? And you can talk reaction, you can talk opinions, feelings. What were people saying?
Yeah, I mean, I would say it depends on who you ask, right? I feel like it was a pretty even split on campus as far as who supported which candidate, at least for the students. I think that there were a lot of women voters, a lot of LGBTQ plus voters, who felt very discouraged by the result and by the potential ramifications of the result for them as far as abortion rights, LGBTQ legislation, things like that. But then there was another side, obviously the people who voted for Trump, who I would say were very excited about the result, obviously. So yeah, I would say that it kind of just depends on who you would ask on campus the day after.
How about you, Luke? And try to give me the perspective of someone who's going to the classroom and maybe it's discussed the next day, or maybe everybody's quiet. I wasn't there, so try to give me some insight to the reaction at your campus.
Well, so I'm in 2 different majors. One of them is political science, and the other one is communication journalism and media. So for communication journalism and media, I definitely think the discussions were a little bit quieter, just because it's not obviously something that people like to talk about per se when it comes to political issue, if it's extremely important to our role as journalists. So they kind of look at it from that lens, whereas in political science classes I had, it was obviously very much the talk of the town. Now, I would say that the reaction's mixed. I mean, we have a very split campus, politically speaking, when it comes to Republicans and Democrats. So obviously, Republicans woke up feeling relieved, excited, those emotions. Democrats probably woke up disgusted, frustrated, and worried. And I think it's natural for that to happen. But at the end of the day, collectively speaking, I think our campus culture is one where we know that we are in a very different ideological environment as far as what people's viewpoints are. So, we kind of discuss our thoughts about the election process and like kind of what happened and why the results were the way that they were. And from there, you just kind of move on and then take it day by day, just like any other time you would in any other semester. So I'd say the reaction was pretty much just, again, like I said, heads down, keep going. We have our thoughts and we'll talk about them, but that was about it.
That sounds like a good note to end our discussion about the election, fellas. Maybe we'll come back to it later, time permitting. Sam, I want to go to you on a completely different subject. I understand September 20th of this year was a memorable day for the Daily Collegian, and it wasn't necessarily a good thing. What happened?
Yeah, so basically we had 35 of our indoor newsstands removed by the university. And the reason that they gave us was because of advertising that we had on like poster boards above the newsstands. 2 of those advertisements were paid for by the Kamala Harris campaign. The other ones were, I believe, Next Gen America. They were for like voter registration. And so the university, without giving us prior warning, removed our newsstands that had the newspapers in them, as well as the poster boards. All of those things were returned the next morning after we had reached out about it. But so I would say that although the damage of that was relatively small because the papers were returned quickly, I think the precedent it set was very concerning for us because of the lack of communication from the university. We didn't get a warning that they were planning to potentially remove the newsstands, anything like that. And so we obviously were kind of concerned to think that at any point the university can kind of just pull away, our publication, and by doing that would kind of strip away, an important resource, I think, for a lot of people on campus, especially during the election season. Obviously, I think the access to news is extremely important anytime, especially during this fall. And so to have that be taken away, even if it was only for about a day, that was still really worrying and disappointing for us that the university thought that that was acceptable for them to do.
Sam, let's try to go beyond the political content that appeared in the Collegian that day and consider another level of concern in this story, and that has to do with rules for advertising in university buildings. That seemed to play an important role here.
Right, yeah. I mean, that was the reason that they said that they were removing the newsstands, because they said the advertisements, regardless of their content, basically couldn't be put up in university buildings, which in itself we were surprised by because we had advertised in those spaces before without any issues. But obviously they enforced that policy, which is fine. But what we were kind of confused by is that they could have removed the advertisements without removing the newspaper or the stands. Like they were separate like entities. They could have removed the ads and kept the newspapers up, and only a few of the stands even had the advertisements. The other ones didn't have any ads, yet all of them were taken away. So I think it's kind of like out, like there's one thing where you can say, okay, if we did violate the policy, that's fine. But we felt that kind of their actions taken by that point were kind of a reach. It was kind of unnecessary to the extent that they removed our content, and obviously not giving us any prior warning that they were planning on it or giving us the chance to negotiate. That was disappointing for us.
And I have a hunch that some people at the Collegian would do some rapid homework on what the university had claimed, and was it determined if the university was justified in removing these newspapers from these university buildings? I'm sure someone in the Collegian looked into that.
Yeah, I would say they were justified in removing the advertisements, but they weren't justified in removing the newspapers or the newsstands.
And Sam, how much does the Collegian need advertising anyway to put its paper out? Put this in a larger context about the importance of advertising for the Collegian. Do you get any funding from the university, for example?
No, we don't get funding from the university. We recently lost the funding we did get from the university a few years back. And so advertising revenue is very important for us. So obviously losing out on the opportunity to advertise in those spaces does hurt us. So I would just say that advertising is an important revenue source for us moving forward.
All right, thank you, Sam. Gaven, I'm going to turn to you about a story that seems somewhat related because it does have a free speech element to it, and it has to do with social media accountability. I understand there was a 2022 case where TikTok was sued for causing the death of a 10-year-old who attempted a stunt she saw on TikTok. Tell us more about what happened.
Right. So the court case involved was, this young girl's mother suing TikTok for saying that they were at fault for her daughter losing her life because of the content that was algorithmically chosen to be shown to such a young daughter, such a young person. And so basically, it's just been a back and forth between what right does an algorithm have in the process, and who is liable? Is it the company, as we've seen with other platforms like Facebook, where they are sort of the town square, and they have regulations, but in terms of who's liable for certain content, that's the poster is necessarily liable, not the website itself. And so at least here in PA, our third circuit appellate court was one of the only courts to appeal this sort of decision, which said that TikTok is not responsible for having an algorithm in with its stuff at all. So
what is emerging as the argument on appeal? As you said, the trial court found TikTok blameless. So what's the issue going to be on appeal? Do you know at this point?
I don't personally know at this point. I know that the Third Circuit Philadelphia-based court that decided that they were not going to agree with this sort of decision is sort of on their own. A lot of other justices and just courts and legal scholars just don't necessarily agree with this sort of decision that they're making. So in terms of PA law, when it comes to algorithms and stuff, we'll have to see. I mean, how far it goes.
Luke, let's get back to you. I want to ask you about an internship you did with Senator Martin during the summer of 2024, and I'm particularly interested in the influence of that internship on your work at the school newspaper. So what did you learn from that experience in Martin's office that might have influenced the way that you've done reporting lately? And you can talk about the election if you want.
Yeah, so I would say with Senator Martin's office, that focused primarily on the budget, being with the Appropriations Committee, of course, which the budget got finalized on July 11th of this year. A lot of things that I got to see in that process were some of the key legislation that Senator Martin was advocating for, as well as the Senate Republican caucus, as opposed to Governor Shapiro's priorities and the House Democrat majority and their priorities. But what I would say more than anything is the biggest takeaway I had from the summer was one of the most successful programs in the budget, in my opinion, that was implemented was the Grow PA Scholarship Package, which awards scholarships for students in PASHE schools or PASHE adjacent schools, state system adjacent schools, I should say, if they are in a high demand field of study. So with that said, Governor Shapiro was actually at Shippensburg University over the summer. I was away during this, so I was not able to attend. But nonetheless, he went to our campus to promote some of the policies that were worked at within our office. But I would say that was a huge event for the newspaper to cover that, because the governor was able to come talk about some of the achievements that occurred in the budget. And again, that our office, that the Senator Martin's office was a huge part of. So it was a good moment for our coverage throughout like this summer for the students that were able to attend that from the Slate. So I would say as far as how that influences my perspective, just my knowledge about state politics increased exponentially because of my time in Harrisburg this summer. And I can say that when it comes to state politics, state policies, what the Republican Party's policies are more than anything, because again, I was within a Republican office. Again, my depth of knowledge of that has increased quite a bit. And then with that, it makes life easier whenever I'm trying to understand how voters think, how students think about issues.
Luke, was there a particularly eye-opening moment during your internship in Senator Martin's office? I'm interested in a young person like yourself going into a legislative office and seeing a lot of things for the first time, and certainly some things made a heavy impression on you right away.
Well, the size of the Appropriations Committee was what was most impressive to me. It is a serious operation inside the Capitol building. The amount of Senator Martin has over 20 people, all fantastic staffers underneath him who are helping make that budget possible, handling constituent affairs, and just the day-to-day, there's no way to describe it, especially during budget season. It's a very chaotic atmosphere. So you learn a lot about navigating those waters within the office, especially as the budget analysts are constantly pulled through meetings, dealing with negotiations. Meanwhile, the rest of the staff is also handling things that typically they wouldn't be handling. You're dealing with constituents who are coming in, giving them tours through the Capitol. You're also dealing with communication services. So I would say what stood out to me again was just how the sausage gets made in a room like that in one of the most critical times of year for Pennsylvania politics.
Gaven, let's get back to you. I understand there's an organization on your campus called the Student Coalition for Liberation of Palestine. And tell us briefly why you're a member of this group.
Well, in terms of just being a member myself, I've just seen a lot of peers that I knew that were doing this sort of thing and getting in community with people from Philadelphia, which has seen a large number of protests in support of Palestinians and those in Gaza. And I think what mainly for me put me in a position to even consider to want to join a coalition like that. It was just after the self-emulation of former veteran Aaron Bushnell, and just hearing what he had to say before, tragically taking his own life. And I think that was just something that a lot of people in my life and in my campus life sort of we felt where he was coming from, especially as an American, especially as someone who's done service time, especially someone who cares and sees what sort of result these kinds of military operations can have on people.
Gavin, what's been learned about Bushnell since he died after setting himself on fire in front of the White House in Washington? At that point, he was a symbol, and then I'm sure that additional dimensions of his personality or his policy preferences emerged. What did you find out about this man?
As far as we found out about like his personal life, it didn't seem that he had any sort of previous instances with I should say the word mental health issues. Although his personal politics, around the time when he took his own life was lean more on anti-government anarchical type politics,
Right.
which is not something that anyone or many people in our coalition on campus necessarily agree with. But it's just more of the like him personally having this sort of change over time by just being a part of the U.S. military. Nothing necessarily to do with his state of mind or anything else. Just him being a part of what was going on is what ultimately led him to think the way that he did and act the way that he did.
All right, thanks very much, Gavin. Sam, we only have less than a minute left in our program. I'd like you to have the last word and tell us about an event at Penn State that is considered a big deal called Thon. What is it?
Sure, yeah. Thon is the largest student-run philanthropy. It raises money in support of finding a cure of childhood cancer. And so they hold events all throughout the year, but the big event is in February. It's a 46-hour dance marathon. And they raise millions of dollars. I believe last year, I don't remember how much, but it was like tens of millions of dollars they ended up raising in support of a cure. And there's a ton of different organizations that are contributing to Thon. So it's a really cool event each year that we get to cover.
All right, thanks very much. Our guests have been Luke Rainey from the Slate at Shippensburg University, Gaven Mitchell from the Quad at Westchester University, and Sam Woloson from the Daily Collegian at Penn State University. Thanks, everyone. That's it for Journalist Roundtable. I'm Larry Casper. Thanks for watching.